Long before maps dared mark the heart of the Amazon, and before the first iron boots stepped onto its mossy floor, the jungle belonged to breath and bone. The Yanaya tribe, silent watchers of the Emerald Abyss, thrived beside the serpent-like river they called Urumwaka, the river that whispers. It was not just water to them, it was a god that remembered. The Yanaya did not build temples of stone. Their prayers rose in the mist, in the crackle of fireflies, in the war drum of thunder above the canopy. Covered in the blood-red pigment of crushed Urucum seeds, the warriors bore jaguar teeth on their chests and silence in their eyes. They believed the forest gave every child a name, not the parents. A child who survived the first 7 storms was worthy to carry the bloodline. At the center of this world stood Chief Akaru, a man whose back was a canvas of scars. Each line a war survived, each mark a brother buried. His voice, low as distant thunder, carried judgment over the tribe. His eldest son, Takari, was fire, fearless, fast, and unforgiving. His younger brother Munica, however, was born during a lunar eclipse. The elders whispered of omens. The Yanaya lived in cycles. The wet season brought floods and snakes that could swallow a canoe. The dry season brought war. Not with outsiders, not yet, but with the Koraka, a rival tribe across the river. The Koraka worshipped wind and fire. They hunted with poison and slept with blades beneath their hammocks. For a generation, a fragile truce held, a peace woven with blood and superstition. But peace does not age well in the jungle. It began with the killing of 2 Yanaya scouts. Their bodies were found near the river Urumwaka, pierced with black Koraka thorns. Their tongues had been removed, an old ritual. The forest moaned that night. Birds did not cry. The monkeys vanished from the trees. Chief Akaru sat beneath the sacred ceiba tree, listening to the river's silence. When the wind failed to whisper and the frogs went quiet, it meant only one thing: blood was coming. And so the old drums were brought out again. The war paint was mixed with ash and venom. The young were no longer shielded from stories of the old battles. They were handed spears to write new ones. The river of no return was stirring. The sacred drum of the Yanaya, called the Katamu, had not been struck in nearly 10 cycles. Its skin, made from the hide of the last great anaconda slain by Chief Akaru's grandfather, shivered when touched. Now, it thundered again, not in rhythm, but in warning. Across the tribe's central clearing, every man, woman, and child stopped to listen. The jungle had spoken. The time of stillness was over. Takari, the chief's son, knelt beside the fire with 13 young warriors. Their chests were bare, marked with spirals and claw symbols painted in ochre. Before each of them lay a war spear, not yet awakened. It was the old Yanaya custom. A spear had no soul until it tasted the warrior's blood. Takari pressed a jagged stingray bone into his palm and let the blood drip onto the shaft of his chosen weapon. He whispered, "I name you Ekara, Thorn of the Fallen." Each warrior followed suit. 13 new names were given that day. 13 souls bound to battle. Far from the fire, under a canopy thick with howler vines and moss-bearded limbs, Munica wandered alone. Unlike Takari, he did not seek glory in combat. His hands were used to carve idols, not flesh. But he was no coward, only cautious. His ears were sharper than most, and his heart beat with a different rhythm. Munica believed in signs, and lately, the forest had been screaming. He had found something near the riverbank the others had missed, a foreign arrowhead, long and blackened, unlike anything the Koraka forged. It was heavier, crafted of dark stone and wrapped with sinew that smelled of sea salt and smoke. Munica took it to the tribe's elder shaman, Valak, a man whose body was more tattoo than skin. Valak narrowed his cataract-clouded eyes and hissed, "This is not Koraka. This is older. From beyond the 3rd waterfall. From the ghost lands." A chill crawled up Munica's spine. The ghost lands were forbidden, a place where light bent strangely and animals gave birth to things with too many eyes. No tribe ventured past the 3rd waterfall. Valak leaned closer. "If these have returned, Koraka is not your only enemy." Meanwhile, Takari was preparing the war party. 13 warriors, painted and armed. The Koraka had to answer for the tongues they had taken. Vengeance was not just justice, it was duty. Before leaving, each warrior stood before Chief Akaru and placed one hand on his heart, the other on their spear. "We will return with their ashes," they swore. But Chief Akaru said nothing. He only looked toward the river, and it looked back, still, deep, and ancient. The river of no return had seen wars before. It knew what came next. It had already begun to drink. The jungle devours sound. Even 13 armed warriors moving in silence could vanish beneath its breathing leaves and shifting green shadows. Takari led the war party in a single file, each footstep echoing only in memory. No bird sang. No wind moved. It was as if the forest itself held its breath. They crossed shallow streams, climbed roots that curled like ancient fingers, and slipped beneath strangler figs and bloodwood trees. Their eyes scanned the darkness for signs of the Koraka. But something was wrong. There were no broken branches, no footprints, no disturbed nests. It was as if the Koraka had vanished like smoke. On the third day, they reached the Koraka hunting grounds, empty. Takari frowned. The fire pits were cold. The spears stacked against the tree trunks were gone. The carved idol of their fire god, Burok, was shattered on the ground. And smeared across the tree bark in dark, dried blood were the words, painted in a script only elders could read. "The river has chosen." Behind him, one of the younger warriors, Nika, whispered, "This is not their doing. They don't abandon fire. Not ever." Takari ignored the chill crawling down his spine. They ran, afraid of what's coming. "But we are not." But even as he spoke, the jungle replied, a soft hiss, a flicker of movement, and then silence again. The kind of silence that made men forget they were hunters and remember they were prey. Back in the Yanaya village, Munica sat cross-legged in the shaman's hut. Valak burned dried toad skins and whispered to the bones. His eyes rolled back as smoke filled the air. "Your brother walks into the arms of something that is not of this world," the shaman croaked. "The Koraka are not the enemy anymore. Something older, something deeper, is awake." Munica clutched the black arrowhead tighter. Outside, the children of the Yanaya had begun drawing strange symbols in the dirt. Spirals and open eyes. None had been taught those symbols. They came in dreams. The river's edge had begun to rot, as if the water had turned sour. The fish floated dead, bellies up. And in the sky, the vultures had started circling, not overhead, but out toward the east, where no vultures ever flew. The blood war had not yet begun, but already, the jungle was writing its own prophecy. And the river of no return was watching, waiting for the first blood to touch its surface again. Takari's war band had pushed further upriver, tracking nothing, not prey, not footsteps, not even broken branches. The jungle had gone too still, and that stillness was not peace. It was fear. By the fourth night, they made camp beneath a hollow ceiba tree. The bark bled sap like tears. They lit no fires, not out of caution, but instinct. Even the night insects kept silent. The warriors sat with weapons in hand, listening to the void. Something ancient was stalking them, though none dared speak it. At midnight, the silence broke. From the east, a low growl rumbled through the jungle floor, like the groan of a dying god. The trees seemed to sway, not with wind, but with breath. Takari stood first, his spear already pointed toward the blackness. The others rose beside him. Then came the screams. Not human, not an animal, something else. A bone-chilling shriek that twisted the ears, as if pain itself had found a voice. And at that moment, for the first time in years, Takari hesitated. From between the trees emerged a figure, limping, burned, eyes wide and white. It was a Koraka boy, no more than 16. His body was torn, chest marked with lashes of fire and bone-deep scars that pulsed red. He fell at Takari's feet and gasped one word before dying. Kulzar. No one moved. Kulzar was not a tribe, not a place. It was a myth. The forest that devours names. Valak had once whispered of it in the old tongue, a place beyond the falls, where an ancient curse slept in the roots, sealed by blood. A god forgotten, banished by the first tribes. A god of endless hunger. Kolzar was not a legend to the elders. It was a warning. Takari's men buried the boy quickly, burning herbs to mask the scent of blood. But that night, none slept. The trees groaned again, and the moon, once full, now hung only in halves, as if something had taken a bite from the sky. Back at the Yanaya village, Munica stood before the sacred pool. The fish were gone. The frogs had stopped singing. A black mist curled just above the water's surface, and in the still reflection, Munica saw not his face, but a mask, bone-white, hollow-eyed. Valak stood behind him, whispering, "The river remembers what we forget, and now it wants us to remember too." The next morning, the jungle floor near the village was littered with symbols made of bird bones and reeds, arranged into shapes no one had taught. Shapes the old tales said belonged to the first ones, those who walked before men knew fire. It was no longer just about Koraka. A deeper war had awakened, and the river of no return was beginning to rise. By dawn, the jungle near Takari's camp began to change. The trees bled sap that smelled of copper. The air thickened, heavy like wet wool. Takari ordered his men to march east, toward the third waterfall, to confirm the old shaman's fears. But every step forward was met with resistance from the forest itself. Vines crept faster than they grew. Paths closed behind them. One man, Iron, disappeared mid-step, one moment there, the next swallowed by the ferns. No scream, no trace. Still, Takari pressed on. They reached the third waterfall by dusk, a thundering wall of mist and stone where legend said the world ended. No tribe dared cross it. The mist here shimmered oddly, like smoke underwater. On the other side lay what the elders called Kulzar, the cursed basin. But now, they saw something more disturbing. Koraka totems, broken and rotting, scattered at the edge of the falls. Charred wood, blood smears, a ring of burnt earth. Whatever had attacked the Koraka had driven them into madness or slaughter. Takari stared at the other side. "We cross," he said. "But no man returns," one warrior whispered. "That is why we must," Takari replied, "to find what waits for us all." They built crude rafts from dead palms and crossed in silence. On the other side, the jungle smelled different, rotten sweet, like meat left in the sun. The trees twisted toward the sky like arms frozen in agony. No animals stirred. No birds flew. And then they saw it. At the heart of the clearing stood a massive stone altar, covered in blood and bones, encircled by masks. Not Koraka, not Yanaya, but unfamiliar. Long-nosed, eyeless, carved from bone and shell. The kind described in whispers of the old ones, the first spirits of the forest, long before men learned fire. Suddenly, one of the warriors dropped to his knees. His skin turned pale. His mouth foamed. He convulsed and screamed a name in a voice not his own. Oryuan has awakened. Back in the Yanaya village, Munica felt his chest tighten. He gasped and looked to the sky. The clouds had begun to spiral, a storm forming, not from nature, but will. He rushed to the shaman's hut. Valak had collapsed. His body rigid, his eyes rolled back. But his mouth whispered something over and over. "The roots are bleeding. The blood is memory. Oryuan remembers." Munica knew then. The war was no longer about territory. It was not a blood feud between two tribes. It was about awakening. A forgotten god had been fed, and the river of no return, swollen with centuries of silence, had now tasted fear. Takari stood motionless before the altar, his breath shallow. Around him, the warriors were silent, not from awe, but dread. The forest on this side of the waterfall did not breathe the same air. It stank of old rituals and forgotten names. One of the men, Hanno, stepped closer to the altar. "These bones, they're not just Koraka. Look at the carvings." He pointed to the cracked skulls. Symbols had been etched deep into them, spirals within spirals, tongues extended, eyes gouged. None were tribal. All were older. Suddenly, the earth trembled beneath their feet. A low, pulsing rhythm like a drum inside the soil. Takari raised his spear. Then came the voice. Not heard, but felt. In the bone, in the teeth, in the blood. Who dares wake the drowned? All 13 men dropped to their knees, clutching their ears, but there was no sound. Only the sensation of something vast and endless speaking from beneath the forest floor. Takari gritted his teeth and forced himself to stand. "We come from the Yanaya," he shouted into the stillness. "We are not afraid." The jungle laughed, a rustling, gurgling sound like leaves whispering secrets into the ear of a corpse. Then the trees shifted. From behind the altar, they emerged. The bone-masked ones, neither alive nor dead. Their bodies were wrapped in stitched leaves and black vines. Their masks, hollow-eyed and ancient, glowed faintly in the shadow light. Their limbs creaked like dry branches, and when they walked, the ground itself seemed to wince. Takari raised his spear, but an invisible force held him. His muscles froze. The lead figure approached and removed its mask. Beneath it was nothing. No face. Just darkness. A pulsing void that whispered with the cries of 1,000 buried voices. Then, the darkness surged. A black wave of tendrils erupted from the earth, sweeping through the warriors. Screams filled the clearing. One by one, they were dragged into the soil, pulled down, swallowed whole. Takari fought, roaring as he stabbed wildly into the mist. But even he was knocked back and held midair, suspended like a child before the void. And the voice returned. "The river remembers. And now, you will too." Then everything went black. Far away, in the Yanaya village, Munika collapsed. His vision was filled with blood. He saw fire. He saw Takari's face contorted in agony. And then, he heard the voice. "Brother, don't follow me." He awoke in a cold sweat. Valak had vanished. The sacred tree outside the village had split in half, as if cleaved by lightning, though no storm had come. And the river Arumwaka had risen 6 feet overnight. Dead fish floated on its surface, not from poison, but from terror. Their eyes were gone. Munika stood at the edge of the water, heart racing. Something had been broken, and now something had been let loose. The river of no return no longer whispered. It screamed. At dawn, a heavy mist cloaked the Yanaya village, thicker than ever before. It wasn't natural fog. It clung to skin like fingers and carried a stench of burnt feathers and bone. The villagers gathered in silence, staring at the river's edge. The Arumwaka, once a lifeline, now pulsed like a vein. Its current was backward, flowing upstream. Munika stood at the water's edge, fists clenched. He hadn't slept. The dreams had grown worse, each one darker than the last. Visions of Takari screaming, roots wrapping around his limbs, fire pouring from his mouth. But what shook Munika most was the final image. Takari's face, twisted and smiling, wearing a bone mask. Just as the sun began to rise, a lone figure emerged from the mist across the river. Barefoot, drenched in black mud, limping. It was a Yanaya warrior, one of Takari's 13. The villagers gasped and ran to the shore. Munika stepped forward, heart thudding. The warrior collapsed before them, his body torn and burned, eyes red with broken blood vessels. He opened his mouth, but his voice came in a hoarse whisper. "We found the god below." Munika knelt beside him. "Where is my brother?" The man shook violently. "Gone. Taken." He heard it speak. He answered back. Then his chest convulsed, and something moved beneath his skin. His ribs bulged, shifted, and cracked outward. The villagers screamed as his body twisted, and from his throat came a deep, gurgling voice not his own. "The bloodline remembers. He is ours now." And with a final gasp, the warrior's body imploded, as if crushed from the inside. Blood soaked the earth. The mist hissed, and the river bubbled. Munika stood frozen, his legs trembling. But deep in his soul, a fire began to burn. This was no longer just a tribal curse. It was a reckoning, one that had chosen Takari as its vessel. And now it whispered to him. Later that night, Munika stood before the village elders. His face was marked with black charcoal. His body is bare except for a jaguar hide sash. In his hand, the black stone arrowhead, now glowing faintly red. "I will go," he said, voice steady. "Beyond the waterfall. Into Kulzar. I will find my brother, or I will kill what wears his face." The elders were silent. Only Valak's voice returned, though none saw him enter. "You will not return whole. But if you do not go, none of us will remain." That night, Munica was given the hunter's blessing, and old rite no longer performed. His blood was mixed with the venom of 3 snakes and painted across his chest in the shape of an open eye. The river roared louder than ever. And somewhere beyond the mist, deep beneath the roots of the cursed jungle, Takari opened his eyes again, but they were no longer his. Munica left the village at first light, alone. Not a single drumbeat marked his departure. No farewells. Only the wind through the palm fronds and the sound of the river Arumwaka whispering his name. He carried nothing but a spear, a carved bone dagger passed down from Valak, and the black stone arrowhead tied around his neck. The jungle shifted as he moved. Trees that once leaned away now bowed toward him. Vines slithered down like fingers, brushing his skin. The path to the 3rd waterfall, once a day's journey, seemed to stretch endlessly, coiling and twisting as if the forest itself was alive and resisting his steps. But Munica pressed on. He reached the sacred ridge by dusk, where the river narrowed and dark stones jutted out like the backs of sleeping beasts. The air here was colder. He could feel it in his bones. A silence deeper than death settled over the land. That's when he saw them. Skulls, dozens, impaled on sharpened branches, forming an archway before the 3rd waterfall. Koraka, Yanaya, and others. Some had markings Munica didn't recognize, as if they belonged to tribes that hadn't existed for centuries. Each skull had its mouth sealed with wax. A warning. But Munica did not stop. He crossed the final ledge and stood before the roaring falls of silence, so named because even their thunder was muted by the strange energy that lived here. He stripped down to his waist, tightened his grip on his dagger, and stepped into the water. The current pulled him under instantly. But Munica did not fight. He let the river take him. And when he surfaced, gasping for air on the far bank, the world had changed. He was now in Kolzar, the land beyond memory. The trees here looked wrong. Not sick, unnatural. Their bark was smooth like flesh. Their roots throbbed faintly beneath his feet. Some even had holes that whispered when the wind passed through them. And the sky was darker, as if night had never fully left. Munica moved carefully, eyes scanning the forest for motion. But it wasn't until he reached a clearing choked with thorns that he saw the first sign. Takari's spear, half buried in the mud. Its shaft was cracked. Blood dried along its length. Beside it lay a trail, not of footprints, but drag marks, leading into a hollow between 2 trees twisted together like lovers in agony. Munica knelt and touched the ground. Still warm. He followed. Inside the hollow, the roots gave way to a wide cavern lit by a dim red glow. The air stank of sulfur and old bones. Every wall was lined with masks, hundreds of them, stacked atop one another. Some were weeping, others grinned. And then he heard it, a faint, rhythmic chant. Not in Yanaya, not in Koraka, something older, a language made of breath and hunger. Munica crept forward until he saw him. Takari, kneeling before a massive, pulsating tree, its trunk carved into the shape of a face, mouth wide open. He wore a bone mask now. His chest was bare, painted with unfamiliar symbols. His hands were soaked in black blood. Around him, figures swayed, the bone-masked ones, whispering his name. Oryuan. Oryuan, Munica gasped. His brother turned slowly, mask tilting, and a voice, deep and hollow, spoke from within. You came too late, brother. Munica froze as Takari turned to face him, the bone mask gleaming in the red glow. But the face behind it was no longer fully human. Takari's eyes shimmered black like oil, his veins darkened and swollen, pulsing with something ancient. The voice that came from his throat was layered. Takari's tone fused with something deeper, like wind moaning through the hollow of a corpse. You crossed the river, brave. But the river does not forgive. Munica gripped the bone dagger tightly. You're not him, he said, voice shaking. My brother would never kneel to a god of rot. Takari tilted his head. He did not kneel, the voice replied. He merged. The river took him. The jungle bled him. And Oryuan filled him. Around them, the bone-masked ones closed in, silent, slow. Their bodies bent at unnatural angles. Some crawled on all fours, some floated just above the earth. Their masks chattered softly, whispering in a tongue older than air. Munica stepped forward, raising his voice. Takari, remember who you are. Son of Akaru. You were born during the Red Ring. You broke the spine of a jaguar at 12. You led the Vine War. Remember? The body twitched. For a moment, Takari's eyes flickered, black to brown, then back to black. A low growl escaped his throat. Stop, he whispered. You should have stayed safe. Munica's heart pounded. He reached slowly into his satchel and pulled out the black arrowhead, the one he had found near the riverbank, the one the shaman said belonged to a ghost tribe. As he held it forward, the bone-masked ones shrieked and recoiled. The altar tree groaned. Takari stumbled backward, clutching his head. Munica stepped closer. You know this. You remember this. The arrowhead glowed faintly. The carvings on it shimmered with runes, the same that now marked Takari's skin. Munica suddenly understood. This wasn't a weapon. It was a key, a relic from the first tribes, those who had once sealed Oryuan away. But before he could act, the cavern floor cracked open beneath them. Roots shot upward like spears, wrapping around Munica's arms and legs, pulling him toward the altar tree. From within the tree's mouth came a roar, deep, endless, filled with hunger. He is mine, Oryuan thundered. Munica screamed, fighting the roots, jamming the arrowhead into one of them. A blast of dark light erupted. The bone-masked ones screamed and convulsed, some collapsing, their masks splitting apart. The entire cavern shook. Takari fell to his knees, clutching his chest. It burns, it burns. Munica dragged himself forward, kneeling beside him. You have to fight it. You're stronger than this curse. Takari looked up, blood pouring from his nose and ears. If I lose, burn it all, promise me. And then, he screamed. His back arched. His mouth opened wide. A torrent of black mist erupted from his throat, shrieking, clawing, twisting in the air. Oryuan had been forced out, but not defeated. The mist swirled in fury, taking the form of a massive serpent-headed wraith, its jaws made of bone, its eyes like twin suns of rot. It turned toward Munica, and spoke one last time. Then I will take you. The black mist of Oryuan surged toward Munica like a living shadow, snarling and twisting through the roots. Its eyes, two orbs of putrid light, locked onto him with unholy hunger. The cavern groaned as if the jungle itself were being torn apart from the inside. Munica gripped the arrowhead, holding it forward, but this time, it didn't glow. The ancient magic had spent itself forcing the god out of Takari. Now it was just a stone. Oryuan's form began to spread, fusing into the walls, the altar, the roots. Every surface bled black. The bone-masked ones that remained began tearing at their own faces, howling in despair as their god unraveled before them. Takari, now collapsed and barely conscious, reached up with a shaking hand and whispered, "The fire, the old fire, in the river." Munica's mind raced. Yes, the old fire. The ember pools, buried beneath the riverbanks. The Yanaya legends spoke of them, sacred lava vents hidden deep below the Urumwaka, believed to be the river's soul. It was said the first tribes sealed Oryuan using that fire, binding him with smoke and flame. Munica stood, teeth clenched, lifting Takari over his shoulder. He didn't need to kill the god. He needed to burn it. He ran through the collapsing tunnel, dodging falling stones and writhing vines. Behind him, Oryuan's scream chased him, not through air, but through thought, searing into his memories, trying to corrupt him from the inside. He reached the river's edge. The falls of silence still roared, but the water now surged black. No raft, no bridge, just the current and fate. Holding Takari tight, Munica dove. The river was ice and fire at once. It clawed at them, pulled them under. But he swam hard, toward the red glow deep below, where the old fire slept. He reached the bottom just as his lungs began to burn. A crack in the riverbed pulsed with ancient heat, glowing red. Steam rose in bubbles. Around it, bones floated, deer, jaguar, even human, all scorched, as if something had once tried to escape. Munica pulled the bone dagger from his belt, not for combat, but for sacrifice. He sliced his palm and let the blood drip into the vent. Nothing. Then he whispered the words Valak had once chanted, Kultera, Oryuan Esimaka. I burn from memory. The crack exploded. A massive column of fire and steam surged upward, turning the black water to boiling white. Munica and Takari were thrown upward like leaves. Behind them, the mist form of Oryuan tried to follow, but it was too late. The fire caught its shape mid-rise. Oryuan shrieked, not just in sound, but in spirit. Every bone-mast one within miles collapsed as their god ignited in the flame of the first seal. For the first time in 1,000 years, the river of no return flowed clean. Back at the Yanaya village, the elders felt the tremor. Birds returned to the trees. The mist lifted. The sacred tree that had split slowly began to heal, its bark knitting like skin. And from the jungle, Munica emerged, carrying Takari, both burned and battered. But alive. The tribe fell silent. Then one voice cried, "The river has returned them." The fires of Kultor had long burned out, but the embers of vengeance smoldered deep in the Yanaya soul. Smoke rose from blood-drenched leaves. Oligui, wrapped in what remained of his war chief robe, knelt beside the mutilated body of a young Yanaya girl, no older than 10. Her small wrist still gripped the broken handle of a wooden spear. He looked up, eyes hollow, the ancient chants echoing in his ears, not from priests this time, but from memory. Around him, the jungle trembled, not from fear, but rage. The earth seemed to reject the blood spilled upon it. Trees bent in unnatural ways. The air choked with the stench of sulfur. Something had awoken. The few surviving Yanaya huddled near the ruins of the ceremonial grounds. They were no longer warriors, just shadows of a tribe torn apart. But even shadows can strike. That night, Oligui stood at the mouth of the river of no return. His body painted in bone ash, his chest open in ritual wounds. Beside him stood the last remaining drummers. Drums made not from animal hide, but from the stretched skin of the fallen Kanja warriors. Revenge had twisted them into something less than human and far more dangerous. As the drums began their final rhythm, Oligui invoked the forbidden chant of Allura, the spirit once believed to be a myth. Blood from his wounds soaked the soil, and the river responded. The sky split open, not with lightning, but with silence. The kind of silence that consumes sound. The water turned black. A thick fog rolled in, swallowing the moonlight. From the depths rose something ancient, older than the jungle, older than names. The Kanju, camped along the riverbank, laughed at first. They did not laugh long. Screams followed, then gurgling silence. One by one, Kanju warriors vanished into the mist. Some were dragged, others simply disappeared. When dawn broke, there was no Kanju camp, just blood in the water and bones along the riverbank. The river of no return had taken its toll. The Yanaya survivors vanished soon after, retreating deeper into the jungle, never to be seen again. But to this day, the river still runs red after heavy rains. Locals don't fish there. They don't swim. They don't speak the name Yanaya aloud. Because in the darkest corners of the Amazon, blood remembers.